Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Over these past few weeks, we've been taking a pretty close look at a variety of different classes over on the PTR realms for the patch 11.1, which is releasing in just a handful of days, with many players still looking forward to trying to figure out whether they'll stick with the current main into Season 2, or potentially looking for a swap over. We've been taking a bit of a deeper dive at every single one of the classes, looking at some of the major changes arriving for them for the patch 11.1. And out of all the classes that I've covered, I've barely spent my time on a priest, so I thought it'd be a good idea to revisit them all over again, especially with how strong and popular Disc Priest has become. But it looks like even Holy and Shadow Priest are actually not in a bad spot either, with this class potentially being in the perfect position to be one of the most promising opportunities for anybody looking for a potential new main going forward, with priest stocks actually looking kind of solid, at least so far before the final tuning number. So take everything here with a grain of salt, but it does seem like a lot of players are gravitating towards priest, and there's a specific reason as to why in 11.1, and I want to take a look at some of those reasons specifically in today's video. As always, if you guys want to see more regular class updates for the patch 11.1, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. Normally, I like to change my environment to be a little bit brighter from night to day, but I didn't realize you could do a whole night raining sky with the environmental choice. So I'm going to be using this thing to get super cozy when talking about Priest at 11.1. Now we'll take a look at Priest. They haven't gotten the most amount of changes. For the most part, Disc Priest saw massive improvements. Holy saw fairly sizable adjustments early on, with Shadow not getting a lot of changes, which sometimes may spell doom for a certain spec or another, but looks like Shadow Priests are actually not that bad and actually might be better than many players may assume. So going from Disc, Holy to Shadow, we'll take a look at every single one of those specs and what happened to them over these past few weeks. Initially, Disc Priest saw a variety of different changes, a bunch of new talents, bunch of adjustments, and one of the things I wanted to change is their cooldown reduction playstyle with the ability of Mindbender or Void Wrath or your Shadow Fiend, because that pet is a huge portion of your overall damage, especially as Void Weaver, especially in content like Mythic Plus dungeons. So in those instances, they wanted to make Disc Priest a little bit better, not having to rely on cooldown reduction from that Mindbender Void Wrath pet as much, because you had to use a lot of smites in order to be able to get cooldown reduction. But if you have to move due to mechanics, you can't smite, so then you lose out on cooldown reduction, and they wanted to give it a little more consistency. Initially, they nerfed the cooldown for the ability a little, wasn't enough, so they went back and nerfed it down to 50%. So now Mindbender and Void Wrath have a 30-second cooldown, which actually feels really good. This means that you can get a lot of your base damage output with your Mind Blast, Penance, Shadow Ward Death. Of course, you still do want to smite in order to get more Void Blast to add additional damage, extend the duration of Entropic Rift, so you can sneak in another Penance in there. But even if you don't get to smite constantly, you can still get a lot of upfront value out of that pet really early on, and I like this cooldown reduction. It feels pretty consistent, and it feels like it's always there when I really do need some additional cooldowns. Another thing they also did is improved Ultimate Penitence a little bit. You can now move slightly while flying above. You're no longer stationary, and you can continue to move a little bit. And you could also control their landing upon finishing the channel. So if you need to make micro adjustments when it comes to movement, you can do so much easier as a Disc Priest, which is a nice gain. I would still prefer to have some cooldown reduction in Ultimate Penitence, because you still don't get it even things like Overloaded with Light. So I would have loved it, but 4-minute cooldown is 4-minute cooldown, still a highly effective button. I just don't like the 4 minutes though. It just feels super weird, especially in dungeons, and it'll have very specific uses within raiding content, but they are going after a lot of cooldown reduction elements, and that is another thing that also did end up stripping out of Ultimate Penitence, but making it much easier to pick up within your talent tree. Another thing they did is buff up the healing of Evangelism. If I had the option to go back between Rapture and pumping up a bunch of shields on allies or Evangelism, personally I would have went with Rapture. I feel like it's a much better emergency healing tool. They try to make Evangelism good by applying a ton of healing to your 5-man party, split evenly among them. The less targets you hit with Evangelism, the more healing it does. So in a raid content, it's not really used for a heal, it's mostly for that healing atonement duration increase, which is going to be good in raids, but in dungeons, I just don't think Evangelism is that great. I still would have loved Rapture because I feel like it's a much better emergency tool than the current Evangelism, but seeing it getting buffed up in healing by 40% does make it a little bit better. They also improving a little bit Shadow Word Pain in a variety of different ways. With the talent of Pain and Suffering, you can now increase the duration of Shadow Word Pain per talent point invested, which is good. Previously, Priest would play with a talent called Purge the Wicked, which modified your Shadow Word Pain to be this fiery dot instead of a shadow dot. And what was nice about that ability natively, it just gave you longer duration on your Shadow Word Pain, or the new version of Shadow Word Pain, so you didn't have to refresh it as often. But now that they went back to Shadow Word Pain, no longer getting that fiery dot, Pain and Suffering does help you get it a little bit better duration, which is nice. It is helpful. So far, it doesn't really seem to have too much play in Mythic Pluses, but it could be good in a long term. Shadow Word Pain damage also got buffed up by 15%, which also makes it a little bit better. They also changed up a couple of different talents as well, like Divine Procession, which used to be a tier set from the expansion of Dragonflight, definitely liked by the community, and Smite, extending the duration of an active atonement, now is going to be a little bit more smarter with the extension. It's going to try to prioritize a target with the lowest duration atonement as long as they're within your healing range. So it's going to try to maintain and keep up these atonements for as long as possible. It's not going to go to an random ally to extend their atonement. It's going to actually focus on trying to juggle lower value atonements, which is so good in dungeons. You actually notice the duration of your atonements going up by quite a bit as you're smiting or as you are void blasting your way throughout dungeons. I like this change a lot. Expiation has also been changed up, so now Mind Blast and Shadow Word Pain now consume 3 seconds of Shadow Word Pain, and instead of buffing the damage or causing Shadow Word Pain and Mind Blast to deal more damage, that consumption now becomes a healing effect from Expiation, using 200% of the amount consumed with Shadow Word Pain as a heal. I guess what they wanted to do is add more talents that end up kind of working with Shadow Word Pain a little bit better, so things like Pain and Suffering, things like Encroaching Shadows, things like Expiation, maybe that combines together with Throes of Pain, or even Cauterizing Shadows when you want it to expire or refresh within 5 seconds. You do get a little bit feedback loop with this type of a setup. I haven't seen a lot of players play Expiation so far, but it does create at least additional interesting experiments for Disc Priest to utilize. It might actually end up maybe being better in a raid content, but definitely hasn't kicked off in Mythic Plus dungeons. Another thing they really wanted to do is buff up the effectiveness of the Shadow Priest or Disc Priest Penance. Penance as a button can do a lot of damage or healing, or damage healing with Atonement, but the actual effectiveness of this ability has kind of waned over time. So they want to buff up the maximum value of Penance so it can be used aggressively, but also they wanted to take away some of the talents that you required before Penance became actually worth using as a global. Normally, Priest would try to bank up a Power of the Dark Side, maybe a couple of charges of Hard Discipline, and then fire up the best Penance out there. And they're trying to have players do less of that combo synergy setup and just use Penance a little bit more aggressively, allowing the ability to be consistently better as a performing button rather than requiring these two talents in order to be better. But also nerfing these talents in the process. So Penance damage and healing is being amped by 50%, so it's a decent portion of your overall healing output. It does quite a bit, whether you're using it as a Dark Reprimand version or whether you're using it as a normal Penance, but it definitely does do quite a bit of additional damage, becoming much better as an ability. It also gets reduced by haste. It's cooldown. It has some cooldown reduction baked into it. The more haste you have, the faster you can use Penance, which feels really good. Like, this is a really not only good by numbers change, but also feels good to play change. And it gets me super excited because this allows you to use your Penance more aggressively for an escapable torment. This allows you to use Penance more aggressively for Wheel and Foe in order to buff up your next Power Word Shield or Smite. This just becomes a lot better as an ability, and aggressively using Penance actively feels really good. Initially, they had a talent somewhere in the talent tree, I believe it was where Inner Focus is, that allowed you to use Smites, Mind Blast, and other abilities to reduce the cooldown of Penance so you could use them more aggressively. When they removed that talent, Penance felt sluggish to use, and giving it a big cooldown reduction based off of your haste, which is probably your best stat as a Disc Priest, just ends up feeling so good. I'm a big fan of this type of change altogether. I don't have the most haste in this character by any measure, but this is one of those really good feeling changes that I really love. Because Penance got buffed up natively, things like Power of the Dark Side no longer increase the effectiveness of your Penance with a proc by 50%, now down to 30. Not the worst, still feels very effective. Then you have like Harsh Discipline, where Power Word Radiance causes your next penance to fire 2 additional bolts, stacking up to 2 charges. So it no longer has those stacks working together, they're now just separate charges. So if I use Power Word Radiant twice, normally it would use both of them to cause the next penance to fire 4 bolts instead of 2. But now if I use a penance, it will just consume one of those charges to fire 2 additional bolts. And if I give it a little bit of time, my next penance is also going to fire only 2 additional bolts. It's not something you could bank up and kind of unleash all as a torrent of penances together, but this feels a lot better to just play overall, just because your penance ends up being a lot more impactful. Harsh Discipline, the nerf to Harsh Discipline really doesn't feel that bad. Another thing they wanted to do is, because of Disc Priest losing a little bit of value, especially when it comes to PvP on their shielding with powered shields, since they no longer have access to Rapture replaced with Evangelism, they wanted to give Priest the ability to at least throw out good shields. You won't throw them out as aggressively as you could with Rapture, but you can still get really solid absorbs on your allies. So the talent Aegis of Wrath has been changed to Eternal Barrier. This ability, then the shields that you put up with Powered Shield will no longer automatically decay. Instead, the talent now increases the duration of Powered Shield by 5 seconds and increases its absorption by 20%, used to be 30. This effect is also no longer reduced at all within PvP. So if you are playing a Disc Priest and you want to play full, big healing, massive absorbs, you should not be able to with Eternal Barrier, maybe combine it together with Wheel and Woe, so you at least have like intermediary big shields that you can put up on an ally, which are more likely to crit with Inner Focus, as well as you also have Divine Aegis, allowing you a little bit extra absorb shielding when you do land critical heals. So it at least gives you like an opportunity to land a big shield on an ally from time to time, which can be really good in certain situations where you just outmost need survivability for a priest. Overall, playing Disc Priest on PTR, it's actually one of the best versions of Disc Priest that I've played in a very long while. I feel like they found a way to make Disc easier to play. The cooldown reduction aspects of your Mindbender or your Void Wrath being more consistent helps out the spec. Penance doing more damage overall helps out the spec. Not having to have too much of a GCD heavy rotation helps out the spec tremendously. And the changes that we've seen for Disc Priest so far, I actually been a big fan of everything that we've seen so far in terms of its overall playstyle and value gains. And there's a noticeable amount of smoothness in its playstyle. So if you've experienced Disc Priest before, I definitely would give the 11.1 version of Disc Priest. I do feel like it runs a little bit smoother and it performs a lot better. And it allows you to play a lot more aggressive with the damage to healing conversion with Atonement, which I'm a huge fan of. However, there are some things that I'm not a big fan of, like not having Rapture, but instead of Evangelism. I do miss Rapture. I feel like the spot healing with Rapture for big emergencies, or if let's say something unexpected happened, you're able to at least absorb a lot of the damage with your allies in a dungeon situation. I feel like Evangelism is a setup button, which can be really good, but as a Disc Priest, you basically need to be never surprised and to be able to deal with damage effectively. So I feel like Rapture was a good button to be able to deal with surprises. Disc Priest, I don't think, is going to be able to do that as effectively with current Evangelism and how it's designed. It's a lot better of a setup spec when you know what kind of damage is going to be coming out, rather than a reactive spec, which I feel like we've been moving away from Disc Priest being reactive more and more as the expansions, the last few of them, have went on. I'm also not the biggest fan of the tier set. I think Insurance healing throughput can be really good, and hopefully in raid situations it has consistent enough application rate. That being said, the way you force proc it with your force set, I'm not a big fan of. It seems to be kind of like a solo target, like a tank proc effect. I think some of the other healers out there can utilize Insurance a lot better, but hopefully they'll end up adjusting the proc rate from the 2 set at the very least, and hopefully it's generous enough where Disc Priest can get full value out of Insurance. But yeah, out of all the healers, and I've tested quite a few of them so far, this isn't my favorite tier set, but it's definitely not a deal breaker. Just with some of the changes the Disc has gotten, the tier set seems like almost like an afterthought, because Disc feels amazing in its current state. At least I would say it feels pretty good. It feels absolutely wonderful to play, and there's a reason why everybody's playing them in Mythic Plus dungeons and pushing some of the highest content within the PTR. It's definitely a very competitive option, and I'm incredibly excited for Disc Priest overall. From there, we can move on to the spec of Holy Priest, which has gotten a number of changes for its talent tree, a ton of little updates here and there, and for the most part it looks like they've settled with the talent tree more or less looking like this, opening up a couple more different capstone options for you to be able to intermingle with one another, with only real choice between Divine Word and Lasting Words kind of having to compete against one another. But the rest of the talent tree has gotten quite a number of decent changes here and there. If anything, I gotta say my favorite part of the talent tree is the fact that you can pick up Restitution super easily. This gave Holy Priest a cheat death in a way. After ending your Spirit of Redemption, instead of dying, you actually come back to life to 100% health. You can do that only every 10 minutes, but it's kind of a broken talent when you think about it. It's going to be great for raid resets, it's going to be great for increasing Holy Priest survivability, but now you can also use this as a cheat death mechanic against certain mechanics that would either wipe out a player, but a Holy Priest can now bypass those with a self-res, so it's kind of nuts, honestly. Besides this, however, we're mostly seeing tuning changes for Holy Priests, like Lightweaver, where it now increases the healing of your heal and prayer of healing by 18% instead of 25%. Trail of Light, kind of a popular talent actually, now replicates 25% of healing done to the previous target. This used to be 35%. The talent competing against it is Dispersing Light, where Dispersing Light now replicates 5% of healing done to 4 injured allies, used to be 6%, so very slight tuning here and there. The AoE heal of Prayer of Healing has had its overall healing effect increased by 20% flatline. And when playing with the talent of Apotheosis, which is going to be a core talent that's put in the center, so it's really hard to make a priest build without picking it up directly. If you end up picking up Eternal Sanctity, your Holy Words extend the duration of Apotheosis by 1 second instead of 1.5, so a very slight adjustment. Even though I see a lot of priests playing Divinity, which allows your healing to be increased by 10% while Apotheosis is active, and casting Apotheosis causes your next heal, Prayer of Healing, to also be instant and heal for 25% more, making it a lot burstier, while the other gives you a longer duration. But besides this though, that's about all the changes that we've seen for the spec of Holy. If anything notable right now for 11.1, when it comes to having a class that has 2 healing specs, Disc and Holy, usually one of them comes out on top in certain pieces of content. If, let's say, Disc Priest is popular in Mythic Plus, usually Holy Priest has to take a bit of a backseat. Or if it's a reversal, if Holy Priest is popular in raids, then Disc has to take a massive backseat. And usually only one of these specs really generally ends up shining a lot brighter than the other. And it looks like, at least for Mythic Pluses, this Holy Priest is definitely not seeing a lot of popularity. Unless you have a playstyle like back at Shadowlands where you can do a bit of damage and healing all at the same time and have very strong throughput of damage, but also big moments of healing. Unless we get back to that kind of a state of Holy Priest, I don't think we'll be seeing more of them unless more holy type of healing is required. However, it does seem like the Holy Priest has a fantastic interaction with their tier set, at least, and it's been very consistent, offering a lot of overall throughput, and has a little bit of this consistency when it comes to proccing it using your Holy Word Serenity and Holy Word Sanctify. And based on the logs that we've seen on PTR, this is before the final tuning, so definitely don't take it close to heart. Take everything here with a grain of salt. But it does seem to be pretty competitive to things like Rest of Shamans, Press Evokers, and their fantastically strong tier set. But also we've seen Holy Priest and logs as well, doing fairly relatively similar numbers to one another, at least when it comes to some of the more recent, or rather not tuning, but rather recent testing that they've done over on the PTR. Now, it's always very difficult to pinpoint exactly which of the priest specs is going to be the best. Generally, what we noticed over past few expansions is usually one competes really well in PvP content or Mythic Plus, but the other may be really good in big group content like raiding, and there's a pretty good chance that we will be seeing very similar dynamic what we saw from Season 1 War Within. Disc Priest likely doing really good in Mythic Plus, with Holy being an alternative option, but maybe not as meta based on PTR testing. If the popularity of both specs continues as it does as a trend going forward, then we'll likely be seeing Disc Priest still rocking dungeons, while Holy will likely end up being slightly better within the raiding content. Again, very difficult. Usually when it comes to this class in particular, either one spec is insanely good for everything or the other, or they just split the responsibility. So it really will come down to, I think, the final tuning. But I think that cheat death for Holy Priest will definitely be very strong in very few situations, but it'll be borderline broken. So I cannot wait to see how many priests end up utilizing to absolutely stomp and bypass certain boss mechanics. Now, as for the spec of Shadow Priest, this is the one priest spec that has barely gotten any changes whatsoever over on the PTR. You see, usually when you have a spec that is just not receiving a lot of changes with an upcoming major season, after you have so many different revamps and reworks, all those classes that got new content and new changes usually look very, very strong and highly played and very, very competitive going forward. However, in Shadow Priest, in fact, when it comes to actual play, when it comes to endgame and pushing content, are apparently very, very, very powerful, partially because of their tier set, which is surprisingly good. With your 2 set, your damage and spells and abilities have a chance to jackpot, which means just proxy a random effect. And I feel like the jackpot tier sets are usually a little stronger than the melee winning streak tier sets, which feels very RNG. Jackpot is also RNG, but I feel like it procs quite a lot. There's even an audio component to it, like you can hear a click that your tier set has just procced. With their tier set jackpot, it fires off a void bolt at a target at 200% effectiveness. Casting Dark Ascension or Void Eruption always hits jackpot. Hitting a jackpot also grants you 5 seconds of power infusion. Mind Blast and Void Bolt deal 50% increased damage while power infusion is active. Plus, they also fixed a lot of the bugs regarding the tier set altogether. The tier set no longer procs from shadowy apparitions. This does give you some choices of what type of builds you want to play into. Eye of Yaxon still is very, very good, and Auspicious Spirits don't necessarily have to play the talent, but it seems like players are gravitating towards it either way, but they want to make sure you're not required to play that talent specifically because of the Void Bolt interaction. Also, your tier set actually can now proc from most of your harmful spells. Apparently, a good portion of Shadow Priest abilities weren't really proccing it consistently. Now they do. That brought up the damage by a significant bit. It also used to interrupt things like Void Torrent and other channels, which also was very, very annoying. No longer interrupts it. The PI damage buff now applies to Void Bolt instead of ignoring it whenever you use it from Dark Void Eruption or whenever you get it from jackpots. Apparently, when you do get the PI proc, it wasn't calculating the damage proc for the ability, which is also significant damage gain overall, and it now consistently, or at least more consistently, procs from Dark Ascension and Void Eruption. So there was a lot of issues where the tier set was good like on paper, but it just was not really seeing the numbers for Shadow Priest. But then after a while, they realized, wait, there's actually a lot of issues with this thing. A lot of the community reported those issues, those got fixed, and then we saw the numbers of Shadow Priest going up by quite a significant bit. And as it stands right now, it's actually one of the better range classes to play, at least when it comes to Mythic Plus content. It doesn't see a lot of play because it saw a lot of bad word of mouth at the very start of the patch, just feeling kind of underwhelming with the tier set not really looking like anything. But after they fixed a lot of the bugs, the damage is definitely there, and it's looking very, very competitive compared to some of the other casters in the game. Plus, another thing they also did for patch 11.1 is they actually buffed up Shadow Priest by nerfing some of the other classes. So Shadow Priest is one of the few specs that has access to a very strong 5-man content group healing tool of Vampiric Embrace. Shaman's ability of Ancestral Guidance got gutted completely out of the patch 11.1, and Druid's Nature's Vigil cannot compete. It's actually absolutely bongo, so you're just not really going to be able to get that much value out of it, unless maybe you play as Resto using it for damage, healing conversion, or whatever. But if you're looking for more group-wide healing and utility, these changes actually just leave Shadow Priest with essentially the only ranged DPS class that has this kind of group utility that makes them more unique. I guess you could argue that technically Disc Priest also has it. You could try to argue that Holy also has it because all of them have access to Vampiric Embrace, but Shadow is the only one that can fully utilize it with majority of actually all of your abilities being shadow damage, which allows Vampiric Embrace to deal excellent amount of overall healing, damage to healing conversion. It becomes a very, very excellent tool. So it actually gives Shadow Priest now an edge as they're more unique than some of the other classes, as they have a very, very strong, with a very short cooldown, group-wide healing effect that can at least be very good in 5-man content, which has given Priest actually a bit of an advantage when it comes to players trying to figure out what the meta may shape up and look like within Mythic Plus content. So if you've been playing Shadow Priest, they're actually looking pretty decent when it comes to the overall numbers, even though they haven't gotten a lot of changes, mostly bug fixes, but also some of the nerfs for other classes puts Shadow Priest in a much more competitive spot ahead of some of the alternatives, which does mean good things for Shadow Priest in general, and even better news for anybody looking to play Priest going into the patch 11.1. But as always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and hope you guys did enjoy this update. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very Very much appreciated. Also, join our Discord community, probably the best place where everybody gets to discuss all of the newest class changes as soon as they appear over in 11.1 PTR, soon to be live realms. Also, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.